Today, I want to tell you a story so raw it still echoes in the dust of the Old West. A story about betrayal, survival, and a choice that changed 2 lives forever. It unfolds beneath a burning sky, where the desert breathes heat and silence, and where fate has a cruel way of crossing paths. It all began with a single, desperate decision. Small in the moment, but powerful enough to strip a young woman of her past and force her to confront who she would become. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The evening settled over the frontier like a slow exhale, and with it, a young woman's life was quietly torn apart. Her name was Maren Voss, barely 19 years old, when betrayal came from the one person she had been taught never to doubt. The sun slid toward the horizon, spilling long amber shadows across the plains. Dust clung to the walls of the cabins, and the wind carried the scent of dry earth and old sorrow. It was in that fading light that Maren's father struck a deal. Not with her, not for her, but about her. Her future was exchanged for survival, a sack of grain, a few bottles of whiskey, and the promise of peace. In that moment, Maren had never felt so small. She had been raised to trust her father without question. Derek Voss had once stood tall, a man of pride and hard work, but years of drought and hunger had worn him down. Drink finished what the land began. Each failed harvest bent his shoulders lower, each unpaid debt hardened his eyes, until desperation consumed whatever tenderness remained. Maren had no warning. She braided her hair because he told her to. She put on the only dress she owned that wasn't frayed beyond repair. She followed him without a word. He offered no explanation. "Come with me," he said. "Don't ask questions." Her pulse hammered as they reached the trading post at dusk. Several Apache riders waited nearby, their tall silhouettes stretching across the ground as the light died. Their horses shifted and stamped, restless, as if sensing what was about to unfold. The settlers nearby fell silent, stepping back with uneasy whispers. To them, the Apache were both feared and misunderstood. Figures wrapped in rumor and dread. One man stood apart from the others, broad-shouldered. Still, his presence felt heavier than the rest. His face looked carved from stone, his dark eyes alert yet unreadable, missing nothing and revealing even less. This was the warrior called Cato, known for his silence and the lethal certainty of his skill. Maren did not understand the Apache language, but she understood enough English to feel the ground vanish beneath her feet. She caught words like supplies, winter, and then, take her. Her breath caught. She turned sharply toward her father, gripping his arm. "What are you doing?" she whispered. Derek would not meet her eyes. His stare was sharp, cold, and heavy with shame. "It's for your own good, Maren," he muttered. "You'll be cared for, fed, protected. You'll have a future with them, better than starving here." The horror burned up her throat. "You're selling me." The words shattered the air like glass. He snapped back at her, voice rough and brittle. "You think we'd survive another winter with nothing? They gave me their word. They won't hurt you. People say they're not the monsters we're told." Before Maren could fight him again, the agreement was finished. An Apache woman stepped forward, her expression calm and unreadable, and took Maren by the arm. Not cruelly, not violently, but with a grip that allowed no refusal. Derek turned away as she was led toward the waiting riders. That was the deepest wound of all. She struggled, calling out to him, but he did not stop. He did not reach back. He simply walked away. And in that moment, the girl who had been a daughter, who had once known warmth, safety, and family, was gone. What remained was a young woman handed over in silence, her old life left behind in the dust. She was reduced to a price, a silent exchange, a life traded without her consent. Maren Voss was lifted onto a horse and settled behind a tall warrior whose spine was straight as the canyon walls ahead. Her fingers shook as they wrapped around the saddle horn. Her breathing came in broken pulls, her thoughts scattered. The riders moved together, slipping into the deepening dark as one body. Behind them, the settlement collapsed into a blur of smoke and dust. Ahead stretched open desert, wide, empty, unforgiving, an ocean of stillness beneath a sky pricked with distant stars. Fear rode with her, unrelenting, each hoofbeat struck like a warning drum. Again and again she looked toward Cato, bracing herself for what she expected to see. Cruelty, possession, the satisfied look of a man who had claimed a prize. She searched his face for a grin, a sneer, anything that would prove the stories she had grown up hearing. There was nothing. His eyes remained calm, unreadable, fixed on the land ahead. When exhaustion weakened her grip and her body swayed, his hand reached back. Not harsh, not claiming, just firm enough to steady her. The simple contact shocked her more than violence would have. It wasn't kindness, but it wasn't cruelty either. It was something in between, something she had no name for as the hours dragged on and the night swallowed them whole. They rode until her muscles burned and her thoughts dulled into numbness. At last, the canyon appeared, jagged rock and tangled brush hiding faint firelight within. Smoke drifted upward, carrying the sharp scent of sage. Low voices murmured from the shadows. An Apache camp. Maren was led from the horse by the older woman called Orin, the same one who had first taken her arm. As she passed through the camp, every movement slowed, every gaze followed. The men watched with guarded faces. The women's eyes were sharp and measuring. The children whispered softly, curiosity flickering behind their mother's legs. She felt each stare like a weight pressing down on her. Stranger. Specter. When she finally sat on the woven mat inside a small shelter, she lifted her chin in defiance, even as her chest tightened. She was no longer free, no longer her own. And still, when Cato turned without a word and disappeared into the dark, something about his silence unsettled her more than chains ever could. No threats were spoken, no claim was made, no victory announced. That night, tears burned behind her eyes as she stared up at the rough roof above her. She had been betrayed by the man meant to protect her, left among people whose language she did not know, given nothing but fear to hold on to. What she could not yet understand was this: the warrior who had taken her did not see her as property. To him, she would become something far more dangerous, not a captive, not a possession, but the one who would alter the course of his life. This was not the end of Maren Voss's story. It was only its opening step. The desert spoke in its own voice. It murmured through shifting sand, through wind curling along stone, through the echo of hooves striking rock. Her heart had never known silence so vast, so heavy, so unforgiving. It closed in from every side and carried one undeniable truth. She was far from everything she had ever known. Her body throbbed as the horse carried her deeper into the night. Her hands clutched the saddle horn until her knuckles burned. Her breath stayed shallow, her palms raw. The warrior ahead, Cato, rode with a stillness that unsettled her. He did not speak. He did nothing beyond guiding the horse forward. And yet, even in that silence, his presence pressed against her like iron. Fear pressed down on her with every mile. Old stories whispered from her childhood clawed their way back. Tales of Apache raids, of women taken and never returning. Those memories circled her thoughts like scavengers over something already dying. And yet, when her strength faltered, when her fingers slipped and her body tipped forward, it was Cato's hand that reached back. Not rough, not possessive, just firm, steady, as if he had already decided she would not fall. The contact startled her more than a blow would have. She had braced herself for cruelty, for mockery, for the cold triumph of a man who believed he had won something. None of that came. Cato did not even turn his head. The moment she regained her balance, he let go and rode on, as though nothing had happened. Maren Voss's heart thundered harder instead of easing. Confusion tangled with fear. What kind of man does that? The hours dragged beneath a wide spill of stars, each point of light feeling distant, unreachable. Night crept through the thin fabric of her dress. She shivered until her teeth clicked together, folding her arms tight around herself. But the cold showed no mercy. Cato never looked back. He never spoke. Yet the steady rhythm of his presence kept her from breaking apart completely. At last, after what felt like a lifetime, the riders slowed. Canyon walls rose around them, tall and jagged, like guardians carved from the bones of the earth. Firelight flickered ahead. Maren caught the faint sense of wood smoke, sage, and something warm simmering out of sight. The Apache camp lay hidden deep within the stone, invisible from the open land. As they entered, voices fell silent. Every gaze turned toward her. She felt them weighing her, sharp, measuring. Men stood rigid and alert, faces closed and unreadable. Women murmured among themselves in words Maren could not understand. Children peeked from behind their mothers, eyes wide with curiosity and caution. Her pulse raced. She wanted to disappear into the dust. Instead, her chin lifted in stubborn resolve. If she had to stand there, she would not bow like hunted prey. An older woman stepped forward. Her hands were weathered, her eyes carrying years of storms and silence. Her name was Oren. She spoke no words. She simply took Maren gently by the arm and guided her away from the staring crowd. Maren followed, dread twisting tighter with every step. Each pace carried her farther from the world she had known, away from the house that had cast her aside, from the father who had traded her like grain or whiskey. She swallowed hard, forcing down the ache rising in her chest. Oren led her to a small shelter set apart from the others. Its walls were woven of reeds and hides, plain but strong. Inside, a mat lay spread across the packed earth. Oren gestured for her to sit. Then she placed a wooden bowl before her. Steam curled upward from a stew of corn and beans, lightly seasoned. Simple. Warm. Maren stared at it, her stomach tightening. Was this mercy? Or preparation for something worse? She could not tell. Oren dipped her fingers into the bowl, tasted it, then nodded toward Maren. It wasn't an order. It wasn't even a command. It was not a command, more a quiet invitation. Maren Voss hesitated, then lifted the bowl. The first mouthful tasted simple, almost bland, yet it awakened a sharp, aching hunger she hadn't known she still carried. She ate slowly, each swallow deliberate. She felt Oren's gaze resting on her. There was no cruelty in it, no judgment, only patience. A steady calm lingered there, unsettling her as much as it soothed her. When the bowl was empty, Oren stood. She gave a brief nod, neither kind nor cold, and stepped away, leaving Maren alone. The silence closed in again, heavier than before, broken only by distant voices and the soft crackle of fires somewhere beyond the shelter walls. Maren drew her knees to her chest on the woven mat. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she forced them back. Her father had abandoned her. The world she once belonged to had turned its back. She was an outsider in a camp where no one smiled at her. No one spoke to her. No one touched her except to lead her here. And still, deep in her chest, beneath the fear and the hurt, something stirred that she could not yet name. It was not safety, not yet, but it was dignity, strange and unexpected, in the way Kato had looked at her, in the way Oren had offered food, in the way no one had mocked or jeered. Marjan lay awake long into the night, listening to her own heartbeat and the unfamiliar quiet of the camp. She felt utterly alone. And yet, for the first time, a faint question surfaced. Was she truly lost, or was this only the beginning? The days that followed pressed in, long and airless. Maren moved through the Apache camp like a ghost, seen, yet unseen. The Apache women whispered when she passed, eyes sharp with suspicion. The Apache children, curious at first, soon kept their distance. Their laughter, so free among themselves, faded whenever she drew near. Every glance made her feel like an intruder, a shadow that did not belong beneath the sun. Kato, the silent warrior, remained an enigma. She expected orders, demands, at the very least some claims spoken aloud. None came. He never sought her out. He never reached for her. He passed by without a word, as though she were air. He slept apart, ate apart, spoke only to his own people in a language she could not understand. To Maren, his distance was more unsettling than captivity would have been. If she was not a wife, not a servant, not even a prisoner as she had imagined, then what was she? The uncertainty followed her everywhere, tightening with each passing day. Restless thoughts haunted her nights, and a tight, gnawing fear followed her through each waking hour. By the fourth morning, that fear hardened into something sharper. Defiance, a flicker of rebellion. She could not remain here. She would not. Long before dawn, while the camp lay silent in sleep, Maren Voss rose. Her heart pounded as she slipped through the woven flap of her shelter, the canyon air biting cold against her skin. The ground cut rough beneath her bare feet. She did not stop to think about food or water. Only freedom mattered. Distance, escape. Her breath came quick and shallow as she pushed through brush and shadow, stumbling over loose stone, her dress tearing on thorns. Beyond the canyon stretched endless land, a desert she had never dared face alone. But desperation lent her courage. She would rather face the merciless open ground than stay where she was, neither wanted nor understood. A spark of hope flared. She was beyond the camp. She was alone. She was running. Then she heard it, the unmistakable rhythm of hooves behind her. Maren froze. Terror flooded her veins. She turned and saw him. Kato, mounted on his horse, closing the distance at an unhurried pace, like a man who already knew how this would end. He did not shout. He did not reach for a weapon. He simply rode closer. His dark eyes held her. Her throat tightened. Anger surged through her chest. "I am not your prisoner," she cried, knowing he might not understand every word. "You cannot keep me here." Kato dismounted, his movements measured and calm. He stopped in front of her, arms folded across his chest, blocking her path without advancing. His silence weighed heavier than iron. Maren's defiance cracked. She shook her head, tears burning hot in her eyes. "You can't own me," she whispered. The words meant more for herself than for him. Then, for the first time, he spoke. Low, rough, accented. Each word sounded as if it had been pulled across stone. "You, not belonging, nothing." Her breath caught. She stared at him, scarcely believing what she had heard. Fear faltered, giving way to confusion. Not belonging? Nothing. The words were clumsy, but their meaning struck deep. He was not claiming her. He was telling her she was not a possession at all. For a long moment, even the desert seemed to pause. The night wind fell silent. The stars above glimmered like witnesses to a truth neither of them had been searching for. Maren Voss's lips parted. Then, softly, she asked, "What am I?" Cato did not answer. His face stayed hard, carved from stone, impossible to read. Yet something shifted in his eyes, a faint softening, brief but unmistakable. It unsettled her more than any threat ever could. He motioned back toward the canyon. This time his hand carried no command, no weight of authority. It was closer to a request, a quiet invitation. Maren stood still, caught between defiance and confusion. She could run again, vanish into the open land and likely die beneath the desert sun. Or she could go back, not as property, not as a captive, but as something she did not yet understand. Her legs weakened. Slowly she turned and walked beside him. Not behind. On the return to the canyon, he said nothing more. He did not touch her. He did not rebuke her. When they reached the edge of the camp, Oren appeared, carrying a jug of water. She placed it into Maren's hands without a word. There was no judgment in her eyes, only patience, as if the attempt to flee had been expected, as if survival required learning more than how to run. That night, Maren lay awake on her mat, staring at the woven roof above her. Cato's words echoed again and again. Not belonging, not a thing. They circled her thoughts, confusing and unsettling. She wanted to reject them, to cling to anger, to fear, but something deeper stirred. What if he truly did not see her as an object? What if his silence meant more than distance? For the first time since she had been traded away, her fear cracked, just slightly, enough to let a question slip through. Was she more than what had been taken from her? Was there something here she had not yet seen? She had no answer. But she knew this much. Her story with Cato was no longer only about capture. Something else had begun, something she could neither name nor deny. The morning after her failed escape, Maren expected punishment. She braced herself for sharp words, for ridicule, for some mark meant to remind her she was nothing more than an unwanted stranger. None came. Instead, Oren stood at the entrance of her shelter, holding a strip of leather and a small bone needle. She motioned for Maren to follow. At first, Maren resisted, suspicion tightening every step. But the older woman's steady gaze allowed no refusal. They sat together beneath the shade of a woven awning. Oren showed her how to pull the leather tight, how to pierce it carefully, slow and precise. She showed her how to draw two edges together and turn them into something useful. Oren spoke a word in Apache, slow, deliberate, then repeated it until Maren Voss stumbled through the sound. "Hand," Oren said, touching her own. "Hand," Maren echoed, uncertain. Oren gave a brief nod, a small sign of approval. But the first Maren had received in days. That was how the lessons began. Each morning, Oren returned with a simple task: grinding corn into meal, carrying water from the stream, learning the words for fire, for food, for sky. At first, the sounds felt heavy on Maren's tongue, awkward and unfamiliar, but Oren never rushed her. She spoke slowly, pointed, repeated, never laughed, never corrected with impatience. The older woman carried the steadiness of stone, and Maren, wary as she was, slowly softened beneath it. She noticed that the Apache children laughed no differently than any others, that the sharp looks from the Apache women were born more of caution than cruelty, and that food shared without words was still a language of welcome. Still, it was Cato who unsettled her most. He remained apart. tall, quiet, moving through the camp with an authority that needed no voice. He never called for her, yet she often sensed him nearby, standing at the edge of the firelight, passing her as she worked, leaving small things near her shelter at night. A carved feather, a strip of dried berries. Once, a wildflower pressed between pieces of bark. He never placed them in her hands. She never thanked him aloud. Still, each offering spoke more clearly than words. One morning, Oren rested a hand on Marin's shoulder and gestured beyond the canyon. Cato waited there with 2 horses, one already saddled, not prepared for battle, prepared for travel. Marin's heart tightened. Was she being taken away again? But Oren spoke only a single word. Cato, then another. Teach. Marin hesitated, fear stirring, but curiosity, stronger now, pulled her forward. She mounted the horse, awkward at first, and followed Cato as he led them out of the canyon. The land opened wide before her, vast, untamed. For the first time since her arrival, she did not see it as a cage, but as something alive. Juniper sharpened the air. The earth glowed red beneath the rising sun. Cato stopped beside a narrow stream, its surface broken by light. He knelt and pointed to faint marks in the mud, small, delicate impressions Marin would have missed. He touched them, then spoke a word in Apache. Dear, he said at last, the English slow but steady. Marin Voss crouched beside him, studying the prints in the mud. Something stirred inside her, an old spark of wonder she had not felt since she was a child. She repeated the word softly, first in English, then in Apache, shaping the sound as carefully as she could. Cato gave a single nod, his attention lingering not on the ground, but on her. That was how her learning under him began. Day by day, he taught her the land's quiet language, how a snapped twig could tell the story of an animal's passing, how a sip of water could reveal whether it was safe, how crushed leaves held the scent of healing. He spoke little, but when he did, each word carried weight. Listen, he told her once, pressing his palm to the earth. The ground speaks. She followed his lead, placing her hand down. To her surprise, she felt a faint tremor of hooves far off, long before any sound reached her ears. With every lesson, something inside her shifted. Fear loosened its hold. Her body grew steadier, her steps more certain. She began to understand that survival was not only food and water, it was attention, patience, respect for the land itself. And as the days passed, the space between her and Cato slowly narrowed. They rarely exchanged more than a few words, yet silence became their shared tongue. When their eyes met, she saw no hunger for possession, no claim of ownership. She saw watchfulness, curiosity, and something deeper she could not yet name. One evening, as the sun bled red along the horizon, they sat by a small fire, roasting a rabbit they had taken earlier. Marin looked at him, a question pressing at her chest. He answered slowly, choosing his words with care. Words are easy to break, he said at last. Trust. Not. The simplicity struck her like a revelation. He was not asking for her trust. He was waiting for it, earning it, quietly, patiently, like a man who knew true strength did not come from force, but from restraint. That night, Marin lay on her mat, turning the carved feather he had left near her shelter between her fingers. Her heart would not rest, caught between fear and something dangerously close to longing. She told herself she did not trust him. She could not. Yet when she closed her eyes, it was his voice she heard again. Words are easy to break, trust is not. And for the first time, she wondered if the walls she had built from fear were not meant to keep him out, but to keep her own heart from tearing itself open. The slow burn had already begun. Fear eased into something steadier. Steadiness turned into curiosity, and curiosity settled deep in her chest, like the first ember waiting for air. Summer bore down hard on the land. Day after day, the sun baked the earth without mercy. Streams thinned to muddy scars. Each breath turned dry and heavy. Even the laughter of the Apache children faded, choked by hunger and thirst. In that suffocating stillness, unease took root. Maren Voss felt it in the sharp looks exchanged at dusk, in the way the Apache women whispered closer together, in the restless movements of the Apache warriors, blades rasping softly as they were honed one evening. Then the quiet shattered. A scream tore through the dark, raw, desperate. Footsteps thundered, steel clashed, fire roared. A rival band, driven by drought and starvation, descended into the canyon under cover of night. Maren jolted awake to chaos. Flames leapt along the shelter walls. Shadows twisted wildly across the ground. Warriors collided at the camp's edge, voices raised in fury. Women rushed to gather children, dragging them from danger as smoke thickened until every breath burned the lungs. For a single heartbeat, fear rooted Maren in place. She was still the outsider, the girl who had been traded away, unwanted. Then a child's cry cut through the madness, sharp, terrified. Without thinking, Maren moved. She found a small girl collapsed against the ground, calling for her mother. Maren swept her into her arms, holding her tight as sparks rained around them. Another child stumbled nearby, coughing in the smoke. Maren pulled him close as well, guiding them both into a storage hut lined with baskets and clay jars. Her hands shook, but her voice steadied as she whispered promises she did not know if she could keep. Outside, the fight raged on. She saw Oren crouched beside a boy with a deep gash in his leg, her hands swift and sure. Maren dropped to her knees, holding the child still while Oren stitched torn flesh. Blood stained Maren's dress, but she did not pull away. For the first time, she felt the weight of her own courage. And through the chaos, she saw him. Cato. He moved everywhere at once, shadow and steel at the camp's edge. His blade struck clean and precise. His bow released arrows with measured calm. He did not fight in rage, but with a control so absolute it was frightening. Maren's heart hammered as she watched him stand against the assault, tall and unyielding, like the cliffs that had always guarded the canyon. In a single, brutal instant, he faltered. Maren Voss saw the blade tear across his chest, saw his shoulder give as the strike bit deep. Still he fought, forcing the attackers back, but his strength was slipping. When the raiders finally broke and fled into the darkness, dragging their wounded with them, Cato vanished from her sight. Panic surged through Maren. She ran through the camp, choking on smoke and fear. When she found him at last, he was on his knees. Blood spread dark across his chest. His body swayed, as if standing itself was more than he could bear. She rushed to him. Cato. His name ripped from her throat before she realized she had spoken aloud. His eyes lifted to hers. She pressed her hands against his wounds, guided by desperation alone. When others tried to pull her away, she refused to move. Through the long night, she stayed. She washed the blood from his skin, lifted water to his lips, cooled his burning fever with damp cloths. When his body shook, she pulled blankets over him. When his breathing stuttered, she whispered his name again and again, as if it were the only thing holding him to this world. Oren worked beside her, placing herbs and salves into her hands, guiding her movements. Still, Maren would not leave. Her own exhaustion no longer mattered. The camp could have fallen to ash around her, and she would not have noticed. Her world had narrowed to the rise and fall of his chest, to the heat of his fever, to the terrifying pauses between each shallow breath. For 2 days, he drifted between shadow and life, and Maren never left his side. She barely ate, barely slept. Her eyes burned from smoke and tears. Yet she stayed. Then, on the morning of the 3rd day, when hope itself had begun to wear thin, his eyes opened. At first they were dull, unfocused. Then they found her, clear and steady, his lips parted. His voice came rough, like gravel dragged over stone. Maren. Her name. Not spoken as a claim, not as a burden, but as if it carried weight, as if it meant something sacred. A sob tore from her chest as she clasped his hand, trembling. I thought I lost you. His mouth curved, faint but real, into the shadow of a smile. Still, he breathed. Here. Tears spilled freely then, and she did not care who saw. In that moment it was no longer about the camp, or the fight, or the fear. It was about a man who had pulled her from one life, and become the only thing anchoring her to another. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall. Soft at first, scattered, barely more than a whisper. At first, the rain went almost unnoticed against the ash and smoke. Then it settled in, steady and sure, drumming against the hide-covered shelters, soaking into the cracked, thirsty ground. The camp grew still as men and women lifted their faces toward the sky. Apache children ran barefoot through the forming puddles, their laughter rising again after weeks of silence. Scars left by fire hissed beneath the cleansing water. Smoke thinned, curling upward until it vanished. Maren Voss stepped outside, rain darkening her hair, her dress clinging to her skin. She lifted her arms, her face turned upward, letting the water fall over her. For the first time since her father's betrayal, she felt something larger than despair. Renewal. Freedom, a quiet truth, whispering that fear no longer ruled her heart. And behind her, inside the shelter where she had kept watch, Cato slept beneath the steady rhythm of the rain. The storm had nearly broken them, but the rain had come not only to save the land, it came to wash away what had bound her. Maren was no longer the girl traded for grain and whiskey. She was becoming something else. Someone who could stand, who could choose, who could love. And though she did not yet say it aloud, her heart already knew. She did not want a world without him. The rain did more than heal the earth. It softened the people. In the days that followed, Maren felt the change. At first it was small. A woman offering her a strip of hide to stitch. A child daring to take her hand. Warriors who once looked past her now gave quiet nods of acknowledgement. She was no longer the pale stranger at the edge of the fire. She had bled beside them, worked with them, stood firm when flames threatened to swallow everything they knew. And they remembered. Cato's recovery came slowly, but it came. Each day, strength returned. Color warmed his skin again. The steady authority returned to his eyes. Maren stayed near, helping him to his feet, carrying water, grinding herbs at his side. She barely noticed when belonging began to feel natural, when the silence that once weighed on her turned into a language she understood. One evening, as twilight painted the canyon in violet and ember, the council fire was lit. Elders gathered in a circle, faces solemn yet kind, their voices rising in Apache. The entire camp assembled. Maren lingered at the edge, heart racing, until Oren guided her forward. The eldest among them lifted his voice. She understood little of the words themselves, but their rhythm carried authority. Then Oren leaned close, whispering the meaning into Marin's ear in English. "They speak of you," Oren whispered, "of the girl who arrived in fear, yet stood in fire, of the one who stayed beside our warrior when death walked close. They say you are not a ghost, not a prisoner. You are Isha." The word trembled on Marin Voss's lips. Isha. Oren's eyes softened. Wildflower after rain. The elder stepped forward and placed a weathered hand on Marin's shoulder. The name was spoken again, this time openly, lifting into the night so all could hear. "Isha," the camp echoed it. Not in mockery, in recognition. "Isha." Marin's throat tightened. For the first time since she had been traded away, she was not a thing, not a stranger, not a shadow clinging to the edges of another world. She carried a name that belonged to her here, born not of her father's bargain but of her own courage, a name that meant she had endured and bloomed. But not every face welcomed the change. From across the fire, a young warrior stepped forward. Brak. His eyes were cold, his voice sharp as he addressed Cato. Oren translated quickly. "He says you should trade her. Horses. Weapons. She is worth much. She is not of us. She can be sold." Marin's breath caught. Old fear surged, tightening her chest, threatening to choke her. Was this the moment everything fell apart? Then Cato rose. He stood tall, unyielding. His voice was steady, quiet enough that the camp leaned in to hear. "She is not a horse. She is not for sale." The words struck like iron. "She stays only if she chooses me." Silence fell over the gathering. The challenge hung in the air. All eyes turned to Marin. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might break free of her ribs. This was no bargain forced by her father, no trade sealed in silence. This was her choice. She looked at Cato. His gaze met hers, dark yet unguarded, waiting, not demanding, not assuming, only waiting. Her voice shook, but the words came clear. "I choose you." The fire crackled. The elders nodded. A ripple moved through the camp, not of protest, but of acceptance. The outsider had spoken. The choice was made. Marin Voss, called Isha, stood within the circle of firelight, her knees unsteady, her breath uneven. And yet for the first time in her life, the ground felt firm beneath her feet. She was no longer only the girl her father had sold. She was Isha, wildflower after rain. Before every watching eye, she had chosen her warrior, and in Cato's gaze, she saw the truth reflected back at her. She was no longer a passing shadow. Marin Voss, called Isha, moved through the camp now as one who had been named. Her steps grew surer. Her heart carried less fear. She had chosen Cato, and in that choice, something within her shifted forever. But peace on the frontier never lasted. One morning, hoofbeats echoed through the canyon, wrong in their rhythm, not the steady cadence of Apache riders, but the hard clatter of cavalry horses. Dust rose at the edge of camp as a uniformed officer rode in with 2 scouts. The Apache warriors stiffened, hands drifting toward their weapons. Cato lifted his arm, and they held. The officer dismounted, polished boots striking the packed earth. His gaze swept the gathered faces until it fixed on Marin. His eyes widened. "Miss Hart," he said, breathless, "you're alive." The name struck her like a blow. Hart. A name she had not spoken, had not heard in months. It felt distant, foreign, as if it belonged to someone else. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Your family has been searching for you. Your mother reported you missing, presumed dead. I was ordered to bring you back if you were found." The camp watched in silence. Marin's chest tightened. Memories surged. The house she once called home, her mother's face, the sting of betrayal the night she had been traded away. Kato stood beside her, jaw set, expression unreadable. He did not speak. He did not stop her. He did not claim her. He only said quietly, "If you need to go, go." His restraint cut deeper than chains ever could. He was offering her freedom again, even if it meant losing her. Marin left with the officer. The journey was short, yet every mile felt endless. When they reached the settlement near Fort Ashford, her heart clenched. Nothing was as she remembered. The streets seemed smaller, the houses dull and worn. Eyes followed her. Whispers trailed close behind, heavy with judgment. She was the girl taken by another man's world. Her mother opened the door, her face caught between disbelief and discomfort. "Marin," Lenore Voss whispered, as if the name itself were too heavy to hold. "You're alive." The words carried no joy, no tears. Only astonishment met her. Nothing more. As if her return were an inconvenience instead of a miracle. Marin Voss's voice cracked. "You knew where I was. Why didn't you come for me?" Lenore Voss looked away. Shame flickered across her face, never settling long enough to take hold. "It was complicated. Your father's debts, the hard years. We didn't know if you were alive. We had to move on." The words cut deeper than the night she had been betrayed. There was no embrace, no apology, only reasons. The house that once held her childhood felt hollow. Her room had been turned into storage. Her belongings were gone. She was a stranger in the place she had once called home. That night, Marin sat in silence beneath a roof that no longer belonged to her. The walls pressed in. The air felt stale, and with painful clarity she understood. The world she had left behind no longer wanted her. Perhaps it never truly had. Before dawn, she slipped away. No one stopped her. No one called her name. She rode hard through the thinning darkness until the canyon rose before her once more. The sentries spotted her and shouted. Word spread fast. By the time she dismounted, breathless, dust-streaked, Kato stood waiting at the edge of the camp. His face revealed nothing. His silence weighed more than any accusation. Marin stepped forward. Her hand trembled as she reached for him, pressing her palm to his chest where his heart beat strong beneath her touch. Tears blurred her sight as she whispered, "Out there, I have nothing. No home, no love, no truth. But here, with you, I belong." For a long moment he did not speak. His dark eyes searched hers, steady and unyielding. Then his hand rose, covering hers, grounding her in the only way he ever could. And in that silence, Marin knew the choice she had made was more than her own. It was destiny. The dawn of their union broke warm and golden. The air carried sage and the deep, steady pulse of drums. Beneath the wide branches of an ancient cottonwood, the people gathered. The tree had stood for generations, its roots sunk deep into the canyon earth, its branches sheltering every sacred right of the people. Today, it would shelter hers. Marin was no longer the frightened girl she had been. She was Aisha, wildflower after rain, clothed in white deerskin, soft and hand-stitched, beadwork shimmering in the light. Her hair, once knotted with fear, was braided with feathers and wildflowers, symbols of freedom and renewal. Each step she took toward the cottonwood was steady, her heart strong within her chest. Certain. Kato awaited her, strong, quiet, unmoved. He wore the paint of his people and the carved pendant he had once given her in silence, a sign their bond was no longer hidden, but honored. When Marin Voss reached him, their fingers brushed. Not claimed, not taken, joined in quiet understanding. An elder's voice rose, first in Apache, then slowly in English, so she would hear. Two paths have met, one of loss, one of longing. Today they walk forward as one. A ceremonial blanket was laid across their shoulders. Then Cato spoke, his words low, steady. Not your captor, not your cage, only the man who waits for you. Marin's throat tightened. When she answered, her voice trembled, yet held. Not because I was given, not because I was taken, but because I choose you. Their foreheads touched, a sign of shared thought, shared heart. Around them, the camp lifted in celebration. Drums grew louder, voices rose. Apache children danced in the dust as cottonwood leaves whispered like a blessing overhead. In that sacred moment, the girl who had once been sold found her freedom, not in escape, but in belonging. And the truth lingered, quiet and sure. In a world that once traded her, Marin found a man who offered freedom. And within that freedom, she found love. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for being here and letting this story live within your heart. If it moved you, I hope you'll walk beside us through more journeys of the Wild West, stories filled with truth, endurance, and grace. Subscribe, share your thoughts, and stay close. Together, we'll keep riding across these wide-open lands of memory and hope. Thank you. Aviso Legal. Disclaimer. Our narratives bring inspiration from the past, recreated with fictional and dramatized interpretations for entertainment purposes only. AI tools serve as creative support, but the storytelling, editing, and emotional refinement are handled by our team to guarantee authenticity. We comply with content policies for AI use, avoiding impersonations, identity fabrication, or historically misleading images. All visual and audio content is legally sourced. Redistribution or modification requires prior written approval. Thank you for honoring creativity, collaboration, and storytelling done with heart.